Hello, my name is Ildiko.
And I'm Phil.
And this is the My Open Source Experience podcast, where we discuss all the things about the mechanics of open source in business and in communities. Follow the podcast on your favorite platform and check out the latest episode on Season 3. I'm super excited because we are here with Philipp Ahmann today. And Philipp is in the automotive industry, so we will dive a little bit into that industry segment and also learn about what that segment's relationship is to open source and how open source works in there. But before we do that, Philipp, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself? What is your tech background and what do you do currently?
Yeah. So here I'm Philipp, based in Germany. It's in the northern part of Germany. It's not the automotive heart of the area, but it's still a lot of things around there. I've always been mainly in the northern part with my little family now and with my parents in the past. The area where I've been in Hildesheim, that's the Bosch side, and in Ita side. So that's also where I spent my career in for the past 17 years, I guess. So that's basically, I only know the automotive industry, it feels. I try to always escape, but it never worked out properly. I escape with open source and other parts, and you say like what the background which I have. I came always with a passion for technology. So my father is a master craftsman. That's not like a master's degree as most know from studies. So he never been to university, but it's like a practical plus theoretical education level in Germany. So you just go on the first level after you finish school, have a second level, and then third level, which they call also master craftsman. You're allowed to train also new people and so on. He was doing something quite new in the past, which is like electrical mechanical engineering. So he was building whole machines. He had a one-man company building bakery machines for putting jelly on cakes and so on. He was doing everything: electrical design, mechanical design, construction, welding, working also on electrical engines and so on. I think this brought me my technology background, while he was doing almost all the things because he always was afraid that I could do something wrong or break something or hurt myself. So he showed me a lot of things. And yeah, so over the time, I always got a passion for whatever it was, screws or cables, wiring, and so on. And so I was considering, should I go for mechanical or electrical engineering? And my father said, go for electrical engineering. It will be more fun than the mechanical parts. So there's more to learn, more to see in this. And I think it was good because this brought me also into software engineering space. So actually, so I do not have a full background in software engineering, while main work is software. But in discussing with a lot of people from open source, you can hear their decades of experience and how they started, at least for me in the embedded space, with little microcontrollers, which were the processors of the times or other way around. And they all come, yeah, I did assembler work and so on. And actually my first programming language was Java. So I learned Java in school. And I never had the full passion to do programming in private life. So there was no, it was in school, it was super fun. It was like physics, which I had in school. I took all these like biology, chemistry, whatever natural science come in. This was my favorite, but math, physics, and computer science were the three which I mainly took in school. I had to draw a lot of UML diagrams these times and proceeded then, that's a funny thing, during studies to C, C++, assembler, and basically taking a light curve there. And I hated assembler actually. So while I know a bunch of people say, yeah, that's a great thing, and if you can do it, it was never something for me. Maybe because I touched Java in the first place. And I feel most comfortable with C. And yeah, I think these are some major things which I have today. I also look into Python programming here and there, scripting things, see how it fits with microcontroller baseboards or running things on Raspberry Pi. So this is what I do now in tech. And you saw also from my latest position, currently I'm senior open source community manager. I've done multiple things in the past with project management, line management, product management, business development, team leadership, software engineering, hardware engineering. So I have to say more a jack of all trades, a master of none, definitely. But was always curious to learn more. So it was motivating me a lot. And whenever someone said, here's an opportunity, I said, oh yeah, I will do this. If I have some spare time, oh, I can take this up. And that's like, if I understood, I moved on. So if I thought I master this or understand things, I move forward. Yeah, that's the main thing to start with.
That sounds like a really diverse background. Like you came really far from, like hacking on the, I don't know, jelly machine and and studying like electrical engineering. And so when you came out of school, like, did you have a specific interest in automotive, or you went to work for a company and then the automotive space just came out of that?
Yeah, there was no strong interest in going into automotive. What I thought I would go to is more in the industrial automation field. And I also did some internship during my study there to just look into like how these PLCs are controlled, programmed, and so on. I made first experience with fuzzy technologies, so like fuzzy testing and fuzzy automation, which was quite new still in that time. But then I had a longer internship in an automotive company for headlights, and I was working on a software project for banding headlights. So we wanted to have predictive lighting that actually the light turns into a band before you reach the band. And this was my automotive touch point. And basically what put me in the automotive was I finished my studies, and my wife, at this time girlfriend, she had a position in Göttingen, which is south of Hildesheim area and Hanover area. And I was then looking for a job, and there were a bunch of automotive companies in the area. So they basically sent applications to all these automotive companies, and that's how I ended up in automotive. And I guess the value was then that I had my internship already done in an automotive company. So this maybe gave me a little bit head up information or a little bit advantage on some other parts. So this is how I ended up in the automotive field. But I also took a short excursus into laser technologies, and this was actually my thesis where I had to measure radiation of laser into protecting fabrics. Like we were looking for rubber, leather, garments of different kind, and try to measure the heat dissipation in the fabric. So this would have been my other way, maybe, if I wouldn't have found a job in automotive, looking more to nice lasers.
So you've had the benefit of being part of the automotive industry as it's become so much more technologically engaged, right? As well as with software in the systems.
Yeah, it was quite a good part. So it's also to see this when I joined automotive, I came as a hardware engineer, and this was actually then that we still built ASICs and had our own chips. We figured it's turning out to be too expensive. So we started with standard product development, doing partnerships with silicon vendors. We figured out this being too expensive, and then we just were buying commercials off the shelf. And a colleague of mine said, Philip, you're still young. Take the chance, go into software development and don't stay with this hardware business. There is no future in it. Actually, hardware is still selling good. So he was not right on this, but he basically said, stay here, change from hardware into software. And when in our joint venture, the hardware was taken out and brought back to the mother companies, I remained there. And yeah, as I was this hardware guy, they just put me on bootloader things, right? So I was really like just how the board boots, looking on a register level, bringing things up. And it was great because it was much new, and this was when multi-core processors came up in the infotainment space. So we had much more computation problems. We had to go new ways. We had large volumes, look for cost reductions, and then thought about Linux first time. And so it's open source topics. So it was really great at this time. And still, when I approach a lot of, or in discussion with a lot of companies from the automotive space, the challenges they face with, let's just call it SBOM. When I heard the first time about an SBOM, I said, what's the topic about it? I mean, we had to deliver SBOM since 10 years. And we need to really be 100% sure what we have in our products, because we had our mother companies, we had suppliers, and we have so much intellectual property rights which we need to preserve. So it's like, I knew about all these kind of things, like, what are you talking about? But I see the value now as it's getting more and more spread about many companies and collaborations. And then you suddenly need a common exchange format and no longer a proprietary or own way of doing things. But yeah, first when these things came, and it was nice growing up with all this, like just seeing how this evolved from microcontroller to microprocessor to a high performance computer, vehicle computing.
This sounds like a complicated process, and anyone who knows anything about the open source ecosystem, that is mostly really, really dynamic. And it sounds like that automotive companies and, you know, your suppliers and vendors, they are using open source. So do you have that information, like how they came to that decision to go and use open source and figure out how they can use open source for automotive use cases?
I see the main reason is easy. They go for cost benefits. So they believe, and I guess I should choose the word wisely if it's belief, but maybe it's belief. They believe that they save money with it, and they can just take open source software and they save development efforts. They're faster and don't need to care, and they're good and done. And I guess that's where they come in. So they just saw, like, is there something in it? It has two dimensions. One thing is about tools, which you use like for your scanning, or I would say anything offside of the car or off the direct product space. So basically to create the product. There it's what I see actually, even if you have open source products, you soon end up in contracts to just have like guaranteed response time. If you have say you have an hosting, you want to make sure that your hosting is operational, because if you cannot develop for a day, it's expensive. The same topics, if it comes to like consuming open source, well, you have the library, right? You just take an open source library, whatever you found, this fit the purpose, you bring it in. A reliability, robustness, whatever, you can modify it to enhance the use cases, but you don't depend on the operation in this way that you say, here's an infrastructure where I rely on, because you have understood what you have done there, you have the control over it, and you assure that it operates in the car as part of the vehicle. And then you just come and say, okay, I have some cost savings, and I do not have the time, the money, and the people to develop everything from scratch. Otherwise, I'm not competitive, and I need to fulfill like deadlines. How do I make it? And so I start consuming things from the open. And it's really the point on consuming. And then you start thinking about, okay, it sounds very good. What could happen? What are the risks on it? And then they end up with mainly compliance to say, what are the license obligations? And how do I fulfill them? Make sure that I don't have like copyleft, which is like one of the worst thing which automotive always sees. So whenever something comes up with GPL v3, you say, oh, no, we cannot use it. We need to get around of this. Which is mainly also because we have very, very proprietary and restricted software parts in. So as to give an example from this closed environment, I had one software part in there where we were just allowed to talk with another person about the results and the behavior of this software, when the other company in which the person is has the license for the same version of the software. If the versions differ, we were no longer allowed to exchange information on this software part. And we, at this as a joint venture time, it was a joint venture company of Bosch and Denso, we were not allowed to share this with our mother companies if they don't have the same version. And they actually, the member, because it was just exactly 50% split of the company. If it would be 51%, this would have been acceptable with an affiliate clause, but not with the exact 50%. And this was super strange. And then you have like this, and you talk to Apple, Google, and other things where they have really intellectual property, and you bring source code from them, and you really need to make sure, be compliant, do the things you have to do, put the right licenses in place, have the checks in there, make sure that you don't send something to the supplier, which then could say, oh, you have sent this, and then I should be able to repeat you things, and then you also need to give me this part of the stack or so. This is like risks and concerns. And where it then often fails due to the time of the time budget, whatever constraints, is then the upstream part later on. So I think there's thousands of modifications in products, I guess, which for the one or the other reason don't make it into upstream. And it's in simple entry point because you may have things which are not sought to be upstreamed. If you think about the Linux kernel and the ARM system, there are device trees. If you have customer bought device trees, you may don't want to upstream them. So you maintain a patch on top. That's fair. But when you have the first patch on top, then there's something like, okay, I make my first trial, I want to add something, I bring this upstream. And then you see, okay, I need to improve things. I need to improve the documentation. I need to have code style improvements. Oh, I have iterations on doing this. But wait, the easy way out is to, here's my patch, and there are already other patches. It will be happy with all the other patch friends around this. They were thought from a different area, but they just stick there. And that's why you pile up stacks, patches. And this is like what we've seen in the past, but cars were not connected. You don't have to update software versions at this time. There was not so much, or you just separated things heavily. You had just some versions in there, and so it was there. But nowadays, where you connect everything again, where you get the interaction, then you have new legislations which demands you to do updates for several years and so on. You cannot simply switch it off. You could, but it's a question, do you want to switch off your car radio because you're not able to fix a vulnerability which could cause, let's say, increase the volume to maximum while you're driving? I mean, this could be a safety critical thing, right? So that's where we are. But it's just taken, like, it's made it away with cost benefits, and automotive is very, very cost driven. If you can save a penny, you will do it wherever you can. So that's what I experience.
But you've got some level of flexibility there too, right? So
Yeah.
meaning that you can modify that software, and it sounded like in the old way you were able to collect a lot of technical debt, but because you were starting with something that didn't cost you anything, that was a reasonable way to go. But you made the transition to saying that doing something where you must support over-the-air updates as well, that's now complicating that situation very badly. I'm assuming because trying to stay current when you have so many modifications to the original version of the code, that's the problem you're running into. They trying to get through that technical debt. Did I get that right?
Yeah. So also to see, like, it's what we had for, you need to be able to reproduce builds, right? You need to be 5 years after the SOP, you still need to be able to update your software. So you need to keep the infrastructure running. And then it's like, you need to make up your concepts. Where do you get the sources from? So do you have local mirrors? How do you keep them updated? Maybe there are the dependency parts, and it does not play directly into this updatability or the air part, but we also had once in our tooling a vendor where we had an open source tooling. We were buying support from a vendor, and we were then locked in at the end due to so many modifications being local that we couldn't update the version anymore because it was breaking with the upstream modification. So the feature which we have developed 5-6 years ago were suddenly conflicting with upstream, but we were not using the API from upstream, so we had to stick with it. And it's like we're really blocked on this, and this can mess up a whole thing. And like, this can also be from kernel version. If something kernel version major API changes happen and so on, you need to handle your own kernel. This is like where I had this discussion with a supplier also for Android, where they were taking hardware abstraction layers, and is it the way how Google behaves? And so please try to go with community hulls, go with hulls which are fully supported, and don't try to maintain the hull in a deprecated way forever. You need to provide updates for the next 6 years. And I was discussing this like for half a year, 9 months with the technical responsible to get the argument forward, to just say, let's stick with it. And we were actually not even using the hardware abstraction layers anymore, because from the past we learned that this would not be a good idea to just go with it. So we tried to go with upstream and community versions. We actually checked like we're taking audio window managing parts and just like, how is the community behind it? Do we find activities? Do we see it's more than one committer? Do we see like, is there issues? Are the issues getting resolved? It's just a snapshot of the moment, but it's still like, okay, we believe that this one currently has more traction in development than this one. So maybe we go with this implementation and hope that we went on the right one with it, but we stick to the upstream one and try to keep the flexibility. And it took us a long time to discuss this. I guess at the end they bought it also. They had, of course, a lot of people behind, right, which do the development. This can be something where you just say, well, it would be beneficial, but then I need to tell all these people who are doing the work that they have something else to do. And as long as I can let you pay for that I'm doing this thing in the way I do, I have my people paid. But if you tell me you don't need this anymore and I don't need the people anymore, I need to find something new, and I don't get money from you for this. So this is like what the supplier environment was also like. But it's not healthy. It's not a healthy environment to go that forward.
Do you know if anyone ever calculated, because you mentioned how automotive is cost driven. So do you know if anyone ever calculated that by using open source, they are saving money or able to move faster, and how that boils down to either cost savings or increased revenue?
Yeah, it's like one element of it. So the easy cost-saving element is just where you have commercial things and you have to pay license royalties and so on, and you find a way to use it with open source. You save this amount of money. That's the easier way, and you can even say, I take some of the money I save to invest into things again. That's how I calculated things last year in a business case. What we did in another project was we were concentrating and tried to build an IoT reference stack fully based on open source. And we started with saying, here's our reference implementation. And we tried to get this reference implementation spread over in Bosch. But if you just go with the fully created stack, you see that the people just want some part of the stack. And then say, okay, we like this, but for our use case, this container framework is not good. We want to go with another container framework. And what this means for the calculation, what we did is like we evaluate, for example, different container frameworks. The engineers were doing it. And after they've evaluated, so they took the first one, they took the learnings from it, took the second one, and so moved this forward. And they just estimated the effort, what it takes going from one to the next version, or to change a hardware platform. So they had one device, they tried it on another one. And this is not exclusive for open source, right? It's just like the general thing, but having a chance to reuse, which is much higher when you have an open source library and an open source ecosystem, we estimated the average benefit of 30%. So it's just like from what the engineers said, what effort they had, and it was somewhere just 10%. There were also some use cases for some component were 0. Another one was up to 50% faster time. And if you have faster, then you directly save effort. So it's both like it's directly in money. And the other story which we have seen like for open source, it's just not, it's one example, and it's most likely not true for everything. We were going with an open source tooling and an open source, it was related to the Linux kernel. So we had Linux kernel maintenance, tooling around this, build infrastructure, package handling, and so on. And we kept this open. And we were doing supplier sourcing. And we had our originally preferred supplier, but we found that it's quite expensive to keep. Yeah, we're cost driven. So we open up an RFQ to look for a new supplier. And by just raising this RFQ, we could find 10 plus companies which are able to handle this kind of technology. And we could get offers from them. Of course, you need to find the proper offer, because it's not only about understanding technology, but also understanding the industry. We almost killed a company once by, that was their first automotive project. They just signed the contract. It was super cheap. We were super happy. And then we gave all the requirements and they were fulfilling this. And what we didn't know was that we basically bound the whole, more or less the whole company, like 80% of the company were working for us. Because it was a small company. We never checked the size of the company and so on. But therefore we, in this like 10 plus companies evaluation. We checked, like, do you really understand? Are you capable? What are your proven points? But what we also managed, and that's the point here to take, we could achieve a 50% cost reduction with same quality by going with an alternative supplier, and even got also a very competitive offer from our original supplier, just because we were not bound in. And I had the other case where we had a proprietary software part and we were really forced to use it. And we were trying to get a new feature. They gave us a price and we were starting to discuss how much effort this would be and that we believe that it can be done in a shorter time and so on. And at some point in time, they just simply said, you know what? That's not the cost of it, that's the value of it. So you can decide if you take the value and pay it to get this value of the feature, or you drop it. And we had no chance and we couldn't exchange. So we had no alternative. Our alternative was now to discuss with the customer that the customer doesn't need it because it was too expensive for us. And the customer also didn't want it for that price. So the company didn't got it anyway. That's just what happened. But you can really see, like, message 30% was time saving, effort saving. If you can have a reuse and go with open source solution from one to the other. And the other, and also with technology awareness, because you experience the stack, you get much more understanding, outreach to experts, like we discussed before with community. And the other part was like really 50% drop in prices for a supplier because it was in the open source space. So that's why I also still try, like, if we have a solution, if you can buy this commercially or you don't want to have a supplier, check if you find an open source product which may have your fit, find a supplier which offering something around this, and then see what offer you can get. And even if it's the same price than the commercial one, you may still be better and find a later on an offer from a competitor 2 years, 3 years later. And whenever they made attractive price, and if you just once bought you in, right, even for single vendor open source, it could happen that if you're in the project, you bought it in, you made some support contracts, nobody prevents you from raising your fees, license fees, whatever you put along with the open source code base, if there's no one else who can offer it. So then you're locked in again. It's open source, but you're locked. And that's a thing which need to be considered in this cost perspective as well.
Yep.
Those are amazing numbers. Thank you for sharing them. And it looks like it really shows that while the main driver is being cost effective to make sure that the company stays afloat and is successful and sustainable, but at the end of the day, you get seemingly a lot more flexibility and choice compared to the fully proprietary commercial solutions if someone decides to only rely on those.
But it could also end up, in the other way around. So you need to see what is your strategy on it, right? We were talking about reuse, lifetime, and so on. And it could even be changing from one open source stack to another, changing from proprietary to open, from open to proprietary. There could be reasons for anything, but you will have cost in changing technologies. And therefore, migrating a platform can be very cost extensive, that you can even say, I get a better offer from a supplier, but the technology, the way our things are implemented is different. But here comes the open source benefit again. If you are already in an open source ecosystem and the libraries are still maintained. We had this, we changed to deprecated libraries. There were no maintainer anymore. And so these are kind of risks which you need to keep in mind. We haven't touched on this yet, but that's something where you need to estimate. And we also, so recently we had a project where, I'm really an open source ambassador promoting the work a lot. And I saw the calculation, I saw the risk involved in the technology shifts, and they would have needed to go from a commercial existing stack to a new stack at a very ambitious time. And I said, you will have porting efforts and you can master this. You can serve this from your existing team, from the people around there. And there was just no reason to go by open source in any case, because they had no expectation that this will also be the next customer on it, that there's a kind of platform that they can resell. It was like a one-time shot for a specific customer, and then changing to it was the technology they brought in, this is really like future technology. So they have already added complexity, and that if you add to this multiple layers of complexity, which you have, changing from commercial to open, at the end it could end up in it doesn't work, and then you will blame all this to the open source factor, right? You will not blame it to the rest, because the major thing which you see is like, I did it open source, I had all these efforts, I had all these changes, all these kind of things, and therefore I'm on risk. And what I really like is, and we had the Open Source Summit Japan, there was a Japanese car manufacturer, which we were asking for a workshop, and they came up. It's not like the super heavy, fancy, we try to get things changed in 2 years, like some markets have, but they were just saying, we want to start with a proof of concept. We want to understand the technology, and we want to go for fit. So let's see if we can bring it in 2030, and not for the next generation, but the over next generation. So when we start thoughting the next generation, let us get this through to this point, and then being ready to go for the technology and understand what the implication of this new technology of the open source is, if it is a fit, and not rushing into a project right now. So I think this was a good way.
Yeah, I mean, managing that change, right? That's really the key, because that is the expensive part. And like you said, if you do it for just one customer and that's it and you're done, then you don't get to amortize the cost of that change over something that goes much longer, right? But yeah, I think that it's a really good point. While it's not free, there's always a cost in change. If you're changing from one open source platform to another open source platform, that delta is typically smaller, right? And you have the ability to manage it in multiple ways very often, which also gives you more flexibility and lowers costs.
So we need to look at a lot from the recent times with software-defined vehicles. We also need to find new models, because what we mainly talked about now was to consume this and make use of it. But it could also be that you want to open source something, right? That you want to make a product open source, or make some components open source, starting a project, starting an initiative, and finding then the business case around this, I see, is quite complicated when you're in an automotive company. Whereas the successful businesses, like where you came from a small idea, you came from a startup, you grew expertise, you brought things up, and you were naturally, organically growing in this way, and not suddenly try to make a snip and force into a new business directive. And I think that's also where the automotive industry currently struggles, because I see there is a need to move faster, there is a need to adopt, there is a need to use open source, but it's no longer about selling licenses for proprietary software, right? You need to figure out, where can you get in? What will I give away if I open my source code? And if I open it, is there a competitor who just say, thanks, I'm picking it up? And this is basically something which you see in this industry, because you touched like, what is this for open source and automotive? It's really like always looking and peeking like left, right to see, how are the others behaving? What are they doing? When I give something away, will they have a benefit of it? And this is something which I could imagine also for when you have a company doing reviews on an open source stack, where you say, is this then how to argue the value? Because it could be in the same side that the management says, when they review things of others, the others gain from it, while we gain nothing. And therefore, it even costs us money or more money when they review, because it could be a benefit for a competitor in this environment. And this is something you don't see with smaller companies which build up their experience. They are just opening it, and they start maybe with a consultancy business, but and bring in this, and they are seen as expert there on this, and they grew on it. And that's something the automotive is feeling is, we prepare until it's production ready, and then release it, and then we earn the money with it. So this is very tough to change, to bring automotive industry say, okay, this is something that's just an idea, it's just open, it's not a ready-made product, where you expect hundreds and thousands of people to just be happy that you save them from the pain, which they also have solved in their industry. But going open early, maybe fail early, but also don't spend the money on it, being able to collaborate and find your business, make your thoughts on it, make sure you don't have conflicts in the past with neighboring departments and so on. But I think this is something where automotive still has to improve a lot, and also on the way like maintenance, upstreaming work, just to be there and say, okay, I also put sustainability on what I have. I check maybe where I can replace with open, but spend something which I saved also into sustainability and invest in the community and start something new and small and try to find acceptance in the open, and then still maybe sell the tooling or the infrastructure or the bring up the portability or updates later on as a service around it.
Right. Places to be able to add value. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Before we depart, Philipp, can you tell us something about yourself that has nothing to do with tech, automotive, and open source? Some kind of a hobby or a fun fact?
Right. I guess I have one, which is somehow still tech related. Fun fact. I mean, a simple fun fact would be to say that I'm literally drinking like 2 liters of Earl Grey almost each day, but it's my favorite tea. But what I can say, and this was maybe something which not everybody normally does or so, I've been once in a flight from US to Europe. I had nothing with me, just like I had my laptop to work, but I didn't want to work after a week of spending there and a lot of things which I haven't. And I was really looking forward to watch a movie, and then the screen was black. And I thought, okay, and so we'll turn it on later. Then they were doing all the safety instruction, not on the screens, but in person. I said, okay, that's strange, but they will come up with something later. And then when we took off, they said, we want to inform you that our entertainment system is not working on this flight. So I had another 9 hours of flight in front of me, no book, no tablet, battery on a laptop for 2 hours. So what would I do? So I went in there and said, may I help you? Because I guess I said it like, I love to help people. So I just went there. And the fun thing was, it was a Windows NT based system and very old, that it was a DC-10 MD-11 kind of version of it. And I grabbed through it, looked into the startup, debugged things, and then a guy passed by asking me how is things going, what are you doing? I was explaining to him, and he said, yeah, just to let you know, I'm the pilot of the flight. So the co-pilot was taking over, and I said, okay, yeah, that's nice. Is there anything I can do for you? He said, do you have internet in the cockpit? Could you search for a DLL file for me? I'm not sure what this means. And then he said, well, yeah, we have. I can do something around this. Just give me another 10 minutes. And then I just figured out I had to just manually execute a startup script, and everything popped up again. And what I'm telling this is like when they announced that they came, said, the system pops up again. It seems the first seats are working. And then they made the announcement. And it was quite a huge plane, right? And then they opened the curtain. I was standing there, wanted to go back to my place, and they said, this guy from Bosch made this thing work, and everybody was clapping hands. And I don't know if I ever experienced this again, right? It was really directly going into my heart. It feels super hot, and seeing all the people just cheering for you that you made their entertainment system work. And it's tech related, but I thought it's a very nice story, I thought. And to bring them all the other side from a hobbyist perspective, related to a fun fact, that people do quite nice things on honeymoons and so on, but actually my wife and I took a hiking trip for honeymoon for like a week, which may be something which is not typical, with just the bare minimal things and without any comfort, but it was quite cool. And I still like to do day trips hiking, and so I don't sleep in the tent at night anymore. That's what I typically try to avoid if you carry a heavy backpack. But what I still do is it's like top rope climbing and bouldering, because I figured out it's a very good alternative to sitting at a desk a lot, and it's because you can have the full body and you can solve challenges and so on. So it's a really encouraging hobby, I would say, and even if you have no experience, you can make progress there. And yeah, I was wearing open source t-shirts there, so even people approached me and saying, oh, you're doing open source? And I never expect that someone at bouldering part in my local city asked me if I was doing open source. So you can make connections everywhere, and it's good to have a hobby where you can meet someone, which you can also do alone if you don't feel like a lot of conversation a day. That's maybe the hobby side of it.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I can now tell everyone that I know a guy who fixed the plane's entertainment system. That's amazing.
So how long ago was this? Because I would have expected them to go, no, you can't hack on my.
I asked, can I break anything when I do this, or how are the systems connected? Because I don't want to get into the system which could do any kind of making it worse. And they said, no, that's exactly this. It's isolated, it's capsulated. And it was in 2012, I guess. So like 12 years back. I think the plane is no longer in operation. And what I found impressive was the purser, when they see that things don't work, they did a hard power cut. And Windows NT was a time where they had no write protection. So when something writes, it can delete the file when it's in the writing process and you cut power. And this is actually what happened. So if someone is like, what was the root cause of it? This was the root cause. The DLL file to starting is the startup script interrupted at this position, couldn't find, exited. And therefore the only thing which I had to do is like jumping over this DLL file and figuring out the next step, and then I could get most systems up and running again.
So planes are actually not as complicated as they look, is what you're saying, right? Just joking.
Nowadays they are. Now they run Android.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. That was back in Windows Day. Now it's more complicated because they're running Android. Exactly.
I love it.
Cool.
Thank you for sharing that story.
And with that, that's all, folks. That was our episode for today. We want to hear from you. Please leave comments under the episodes that you watched. Share your feedback and share your experiences to continue the conversation. And let us know what topics you would like to hear next. Stay tuned because the next episode is just around the corner.